Ilara Voss had learned long ago that silence was safer than words. In the Blackthorn Pack, where strength was worshipped and weakness was punished with laughter, she had chosen to disappear into the background of every gathering. She was an Omega, the lowest rank a wolf could hold, and worse, she was an Omega who could not fully shift. Her wolf lived somewhere inside her, curled up and quiet, as if it too were ashamed to be seen. The other wolves called her many things: broken, useless, a stain on the pack's honor. She had stopped counting the insults years ago, the way a person stops counting raindrops in a storm. She simply lowered her head, gathered her herbs, and returned to the small healing hut she shared with old Mira, the pack's healer, who was the only person who had ever looked at her without contempt. It was a cold evening in early autumn when the horns sounded across the territory, sharp and urgent, cutting through the quiet like a blade. Ilara had been sorting dried lavender when she heard the commotion outside. Warriors were running, voices were shouting, and through the chaos came a name that made her chest tighten: Alpha King Kale Ashwood. Kale was not simply the leader of the Blackthorn Pack. He was the Alpha King, the wolf, who had ended years of war between rival packs and forced them into a single, fragile peace. He was feared by enemies and respected by allies, a man whose very presence could silence a room. Ilara had seen him only a handful of times, always from a distance, always surrounded by warriors who would never let someone like her get close. Tonight, he was carried through the gates by two of his own guards, his body limp, his face pale as moonlight, blood soaked through the bandages wrapped around his side, though the wound beneath was old, a scar from the war that had never truly healed. Something dark pulsed beneath his skin, a sickly black vein spreading slowly from the center of the old injury. Old Mira rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she examined him. "This is not an ordinary wound," she whispered. "This is a curse. Someone has laced it with dark magic, and it has been growing inside him for weeks." The pack's warriors murmured among themselves, fear replacing their usual confidence. Celine Rourke, a proud and beautiful she-wolf who had long been expected to become Kale's mate, pushed through the crowd, her voice sharp with panic. "Do something. You are the healer. Fix him." Old Mira's shoulders sagged. "I have tried everything I know. My herbs cannot touch a curse like this. It requires an older kind of healing, one I only remember in fragments." Her eyes lifted, searching the crowd until they found Ilara standing quietly near the back. "Ilara, your mother's teachings, the old rites, you remember them?" The crowd turned to look at her, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Ilara felt every eye on her, felt the familiar heat of shame rising in her cheeks. She was used to being invisible, not stared at. She was used to being mocked, not needed. Celine's lips curled into a sneer. "Her? The pack joke? You want the weakest wolf among us to touch our king?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Ilara wanted to shrink away, to disappear into the shadows where she belonged. But then her eyes fell on Kale, lying still on the ground, his breathing shallow, his skin growing paler by the second. She thought of her mother, who had died protecting this pack, who had taught her these healing rites in secret, because she believed Ilara had a gift worth protecting, even when no one else did. She stepped forward. "I can help him," she said quietly, though her voice did not waver. "But I need everyone to step back and let me work." Kale, drifting in and out of consciousness, managed to lift his hand slightly. "Let her," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "I have nothing left to lose." The crowd fell silent. Slowly, reluctantly, they stepped back, forming a wide circle around Ilara and the fallen king. Ilara knelt beside him, her hands hovering over the wound. She closed her eyes and let the memory of her mother's teachings rise within her, the ancient words, the old songs meant to call the body's own strength back from the edge of death. She had never used them on anyone but small animals and, once, a dying child in a neighboring village. She had never dared try them on someone as powerful, and as important, as an Alpha King. But fear was a luxury she could not afford tonight. She placed her palms gently over the wound, feeling the curse's dark energy pulse beneath her fingers, like a living, hungry thing. It resisted her, pushing back against her touch, trying to burrow deeper into him. She began to hum an old melody, low and steady, the same one her mother used to sing while gathering herbs beneath the full moon. Slowly, she let her own strength flow into him, drawing the darkness out and into herself, absorbing what she could and releasing the rest into the earth beneath her knees. The process was slow and exhausting. Hours passed. The moon rose high above the pack's territory, casting silver light over the circle of watching wolves, many of whom had never seen true healing magic performed before. Old Mira stood close, ready to intervene if Elara faltered, but she never did. Sweat dripped from Elara's brow, her arms trembled with fatigue, yet she did not stop. Sometime near dawn, the black veins beneath Kale's skin began to shrink, retreating back toward the original wound, like a tide pulling away from the shore. His breathing steadied. Color slowly returned to his face. The pack watched in stunned silence as the wound that had defied every healer for weeks finally began to close beneath Elara's trembling hands. When it was over, Elara collapsed backward, completely spent, her vision blurring at the edges. Old Mira caught her before she could fall, cradling her gently. "She did it," Old Mira whispered, awe in her voice. "She actually did it." Kale's eyes fluttered open. For the first time in weeks, his gaze was clear, sharp, alert. He looked around, confused for a moment, before his eyes settled on the exhausted Omega being held by the healer. Something shifted inside him, something ancient and instinctive, a recognition that came not from his mind, but from the wolf buried deep within him. He did not understand it yet, not fully, but he would. Elara was carried back to the healing hut to rest, and over the following days, whispers spread through the pack like wildfire. The Omega everyone had mocked, the girl they called broken and useless, had healed the Alpha King when no one else could. Some wolves looked at her differently now, with confusion, with curiosity, even with something close to respect. Others, like Selene, only grew more resentful. "It means nothing," Selene told her circle of friends, her voice tight with barely concealed jealousy. "A lucky trick. She will go back to being nothing once the king recovers fully." But Kale did not forget. As his strength returned, so did his memories of that night, fragmented but powerful. He remembered the warmth of her hands. He remembered the melody she hummed, soft and steady even as exhaustion pulled at her. He remembered, most of all, the way his wolf had gone quiet and calm in her presence, as if some deep, restless hunger inside him had finally been soothed. He began visiting the healing hut, at first under the excuse of checking on his recovery, though old Mira could see through the pretense easily enough. Elara was quiet around him, unused to his attention, unsure of how to behave in front of the king who had once seemed as distant as the moon. But slowly, over quiet conversations about herbs and old healing traditions, about the mother Elara had lost and the war Kale had survived, something unspoken began to grow between them. Kale found himself drawn to her honesty, her lack of pretense. She did not flatter him or fear him the way most of the pack did. She simply spoke to him as a person, not as a king, and Elara, who had spent her whole life believing she was worthless, began to feel, for the first time, that perhaps she was not. Word of these visits reached Selene, who grew desperate to remind the pack, and Kale, of tradition. She pushed for a formal announcement of her mating to the Alpha King, insisting that the pack needed stability and unity after the recent crisis. Pressured by his council, and still uncertain of the strange pull he felt toward Elara, Kale reluctantly agreed to a pack assembly where the announcement would be made. On the night of the assembly, the entire pack gathered beneath the open sky, torches lighting the clearing where such important declarations were always made. Selene stood beside Kale, dressed in fine furs, triumphant satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. Elara stood near the back once more, telling herself this was how it should be, that she had no right to expect anything more than gratitude for her service. But as the pack elder began the ceremonial words, Kale's wolf, silent and restrained for so long, could bear it no longer. His eyes flashed with a golden light, and his composed expression faltered. He staggered slightly, gripping the ceremonial platform as a low growl rumbled in his chest, one that did not belong entirely to the man. The elder stopped speaking, startled. Selene reached for his arm, But Kale pulled away, his breathing rough, his gaze suddenly sweeping across the crowd until it landed on Ilara. "I cannot," he said, his voice strained, caught between his own will and his wolf's insistence. "I cannot do this." Gasps rippled through the assembled pack. Selene's face went pale with disbelief. "Kale, what are you saying?" He took a step down from the platform, then another, his golden eyes never leaving Ilara. The crowd parted instinctively as he walked toward her, drawn by something far older and more powerful than tradition or expectation. Ilara stood frozen, her heart pounding, unsure whether to run or stay. "You healed me," Kale said, stopping before her, his voice softer now, though every wolf in the clearing could hear it in the heavy silence. "Not just my body. Something inside me that I did not know was broken until you touched it. My wolf recognized you that night, and it has not stopped searching for you since." Ilara's eyes filled with tears she tried desperately to hold back. "I am only an Omega," she whispered. "I have nothing to offer a king." "You have already given me everything that matters," Kale said. "Strength is not the only thing worth respecting. Kindness, healing, courage in the face of cruelty, that is worth more than any title." Before the entire pack, before Selene's shocked and furious stare, Kale reached for Ilara's hand. His wolf surged forward one final time, and in a moment that would be spoken of for generations, he claimed her as his true mate beneath the open sky, sealing a bond that no tradition or objection could undo. The pack that had once mocked her now watched in stunned silence, witnessing the truth unfold before them. Selene, humiliated and exposed, was stripped of her false claims and standing among the council, her cruelty finally seen for what it was. In the days that followed, Ilara was no longer the Omega hiding in the shadows. She stood beside the Alpha King, not as a healer summoned in desperation, but as his chosen mate, respected and protected by the very pack that had once dismissed her. Old Mira watched with quiet pride as the girl she had trained grew into her rightful place, no longer defined by the whispers of others, but by the strength she had carried inside her all along. And Kale, whose wounds both seen and unseen had finally healed, knew that he had found something far greater than power or victory in war. He had found someone whose gentleness matched her courage, someone who had saved him not out of duty, but out of a heart the pack had never bothered to see. From that night on, no one in the Blackthorn pack dared call Ilara weak again.